to the LJL Academy Day 4. We're here for Game 4. It's Middlecott and Recollect on your screen. How are you doing, man?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. I'm ready to watch some League of Legends gameplay and hopefully a decently entertaining matchup this one round.
It absolutely should be, as we've got Axiz facing off against the Hawks. Let's get those rosters on our screen right now, just briefly. I feel like on the Axiz side, it's a case of a lot of unutilized potential here, but the Hawks definitely looking like one of the stronger teams.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because for me, Axiz was the team I looked at after day one and went, this is probably one of the top teams. They're looking really strong. And then they kind of just haven't picked up any wins, and it feels like they haven't achieved that same level of play that they achieved when they were playing against V3. So it's a bit of a weird one. And then obviously on the flip side, SHG coming into this one, looking pretty strong. Wasteland having a solid game. They just look like a pretty strong team. I mean, they obviously did end up losing that matchup, I think, earlier today, with Howler playing the Samira, if I remember correctly. But they still look very good in the early game of that matchup, and they've shown a lot of solid signs throughout the tournament in general. So definitely a team to keep an eye on for, and probably my personal expectation to take this particular game.
Yeah, I think if Axiz are able to rediscover that day one form, honestly, could have been second best team in this round robin, but like you said, have fallen off a little bit recently. Toltu and DNT have still been strong performers for them, so if they're able to pop off, then there is definitely an angle there. But I think the Hawks have just looked like a stronger team overall, and that's really been where they've set themselves apart.
Yeah, and to me, the big talking point is the solo laners, right? Ricky is now starting to step it up a little bit more to the level that we were expecting for the rest of the team. I think, honestly, in my opinion, didn't have the best day one, day two, but at least in day three, looking a little bit better to me. And Wasteland has been solid throughout, in general, getting CS leads, as we've spoke about previously, and now starting to show the high level of individual plays as well in terms of the team fighting aspects, and the mechanics are starting to come through on top of those sort of CS leads, right? He's actually using those leads later on into the game, and when you combine that with their bot lane that, you know, did look very good in the last game they just played, though obviously not able to pick up the win, it looks like a team that's starting to round out quite well coming into the more important parts of this tournament.
And I think that's the important part. Obviously, a lot of these teams coming in, it's a very short tournament, and a lot of the rosters haven't had that time to get that synergy gelling together. So there's always going to be some teething issues in the first couple of days. But building up throughout the tournament is really what you want to be doing, rather than what Axiz's apparent trajectory is, where they are declining in terms of their overall standings.
Yeah, overall, as we said, they kind of have been struggling. And I mean, the biggest aspect is the fact that in lane Axiz looks great, but when it comes to the more, you know, team reliant plays, the setting up the vision and fighting around it, understanding their compositional win conditions, they struggle with that aspect of the game. And I feel like if they're able to find those aspects, if they can set up the vision right, if they can make the plays around their composition, they could absolutely be a dark horse later on. They could be one of those top teams like we thought they were going to be. But it just hasn't come together just yet, but we'll have to see if they can turn that around in this one.
Yeah, it's always an issue when you're discussing a team in terms of ifs, because there's definitely been the signs haven't been realised. Obviously, we are in the pick and bans now. Axiz choosing to remove the Samira, Galio, and Lee Sin, taking the Samira away from Howler. I think definitely a good idea. Ziggs and Silas removed so far by the Hawks, targeting away Mutton's Volibear with their final ban.
Yeah, that does mean this Viego pick is open, and in all honesty, probably the highest priority champion, in my opinion, in terms of the relevance it has within the games. It's not the highest picked, but when it is picked, it's almost always effective. And to me, when you think about that sort of aspect, it's an interesting pick to be allowed through for that B1 situation, but answered by this Aphelios Thresh that has become very popular in pro play.
Yeah, and I mean, it means we get to see Howler's Aphelios, which we're always excited for, and Charlie's Thresh. A couple of game-winning hooks in their matchup against Rascal Jesters a couple of days back. Just go back and watch the VOD. Honestly, the last 10 minutes of that is just Charlie hitting hook after hook after hook. getting a Baron steal as well. Absolutely class performance by them, so hopefully we can see that run back. Meanwhile, though, haven't worked out how to say. Are we going Dean T for the Axis?
I've been saying Deent, but I do think Dean T is probably correct.
Dean T. It sounds like, I don't know, but anyway, they're going to be piloting the Ezreal.
Let's call him Tommy.
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 No.
No, okay. Maybe not. All right. Anyway, we've got the LeBlanc pick up here for Nalicio, and Nalicio has played this one before, and it's looked pretty solid. The issue I've had is that the LeBlancs so far haven't actually been that great in this tournament. There was, that one part later on in one of the games yesterday where it suddenly came alive, but in terms of the early games, people have been playing a lot of backline LeBlanc, and I'd rather see them play dive LeBlanc in these fights.
Yeah, Wasted will be picking up the victor. Kind of infamous at this point on this champion. Seems to get CS leads and win lanes that he absolutely shouldn't. And then, like we were talking about, has started to transition that laning power a bit more into the team fighting as well. Hawks have drafted themselves a couple of very high damage carry threats. I imagine they'll be rounding out the rest of this pick and ban phase with a couple of more enabling champions.
Yeah, definitely. With what they've got so far, the damage is certainly there, but they've got a lot of backline access champions so far. These types that want to burst people down, and then Viego can go absolutely ballistic with the resets. We need to see, as you say, something that is either diving into the backline or something that's helping to set it up, or maybe something that does a little bit of both. My thought process goes towards something like Leona, which is still on the table as of yet. However, when we look at the Hawks composition, the jungle pool, it is still there, but it's limited. To me, my thought process goes towards Xin Zhao, or potentially the Diana, but I'm thinking it's more of a Xin Zhao type game this time around.
Yeah, could sort of split up the fight a little bit more and curves quite nicely, I feel. The first Diana ultimate, that Moonfall, it never really does as much damage as you would expect it to, but Xin Zhao is a champion that can just sort of run through basically anyone in the early game and offers you a hell of a lot of tankiness and sticking power when you get into the later game skirmishes. So I don't think it's a real surprise that Anchor Chan's picking that one up.
Yeah, on top of that, you want to have that physical magic spread between the mid-jungle, and when you're pairing with something like Victor, you really need a powerful early-game aggressor to help make up for that potential lack of laning power before he hits his first upgrade on the E to get wave clear. So pairing him with that Xin Zhao makes a lot of sense. Outside of Axiz, they pick up one of those engage tools within this Ornn. The Call of the Forged God is known as being one of the best engage tools in the game. I'd like to see them pair that with another engage tool coming through that bot lane. There is quite a few engage supports still available.
Yeah, could go towards something like the Leona or the Alistar or this Rakan picked up for Dicey. I think a little bit more flexible in the way that he plays, can go aggressive, but can also peel back with the shields, with the heals, and defensive knockup. So offers D&T something a little bit more flexible to ensure his safety in this lane.
Yeah, I can say that the laning matchup is going to be very difficult in lane here for the side of Axiz in the bot lane. And with the Lilia hover coming through, we might see solo lane Lilia, I want to say. Or is it going to be solo lane Xin? It could be either or. I've seen solo lane Lilia a little bit. It can be very oppressive if you can start dancing around these melee champions like the Ornn. The idea being, if he can set up he wants to set up the Brittle with that W, but the Lilia can absolutely just dance around with the Q, use that movement speed to deny that sort of percent max health damage, and just win trades that way round. So it can be very strong if Ricky can start playing it to that effective level. On top of that, when you consider the lack of matchup knowledge potentially coming through here for Toll 2, could be very oppressive.
Yeah, I feel like Lane Lilia was something that we heard whispers about for a couple of patches, but never really materialized into the strong meta-defining pick that some people were hyping it up to be. I think it is still strong, especially up against tanks. I don't think this is a pick that you could take into something like a Camille, something that can easily get on top of you. But like you were saying, with that kiting around, with the booming blows, I believe it's called, you can get a lot of damage down onto the Ornn, a lot of sustain as well. And I imagine it makes it a lot easier for Anchor Chan to actually pressurize onto Toll 2 on this pick.
And there's one more major aspect to consider as well, and that's the amount of range on the enemy composition. Lilia's wanting to try and set up those multi-man ultimates to land massive sleeps into the enemy, and typically that's going to be effective when the enemy team has low range or is consisted of primarily melee-based champions. And
Yeah.
when you look at the composition that has been drafted against the Lilia, we're looking at, Ornn Viego, not known for their range. Same kind of with LeBlanc, though she's a little bit more jittery, and Ezreal, outside of using that Mystic Shot, his auto range is pretty low. So I feel as though it's not a bad situation to be playing that Lilia. On top of that, it provides some CC, which the own composition is kind of lacking in, because when you look at this composition that has been drafted up so far, there isn't a whole lot of hard CC engage that has been picked up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like zone control tools, like the box, the gravity field, and the crescent guard as well. But like you were mentioning, there isn't really that big go button. If you can get a spell lead into a sleep onto multiple people, you can really start getting those engages off. But I feel it also complements Hawks' damage spread quite well. Obviously, they've got the AD jungler, and then AP solo lane. This is something that we're kind of seeing top lane with the Kennen coming back into meta. We're seeing Lissandra flying all around the place as well. It's not really the easiest thing to itemize in terms of magic resist on the side of Axiz either, as you can't really go its end. And then if you're going Banshee second on LeBlanc, not really going to be dealing the damage that you want. So I think it's a pick that actually fits fairly well into the composition that the Hawks have got here.
Yeah, the only issue is going to be how well-rounded the composition is in general in terms of the way it'll actually function, right? Because
Yeah.
it might be another case of when we saw the Poppy jungle come through yesterday, where in theory, it has some aspects that could be very good, but there are other problems with it. For example, as I said, the engage tools they actually have aren't the best. They also don't have a whole lot of defensive tools versus the primary engage that comes through from the quickness grand entrance combo. The Ornn Horn engage can come through as well. Outside of the Lantern, how much have they actually got to be protective of? And when you have two carries, you can Lantern one of them, sure. But those are two very big engages that are kind of hard to stop unless the Thresh is playing like an absolute god.
Yeah, I think one of the saving graces is that in terms of damage-based divers, it's not like you've got massive amounts on Axiz. I think there isn't something like a Camille there which can stay in the backline for a long time, or a Jinzhao that can perform something similar. So once those engages are dissuaded and you don't have the Call of the Forge God or the quickness, I think it becomes a hell of a lot easier for Hawks to actually play out these fights. But I think I tend to agree with you on the point that the Lantern doesn't feel like it's going to be enough in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah, and the thing is as well is you don't even have to necessarily kill immediately with the engage, because if Viego gets them low enough, he can just reset, and once the resets start coming, fights become very dangerous. I mean, it's well known that if he gets one reset, he's probably getting a second kill off of that reset from the ultimate, and then that usually turns into a third or a fourth, and it starts to snowball. So the question has to be asked, can you survive Call of the Forge God quickness engage? And if you can, do you then survive the LeBlanc follow-up into Viego? If you can do that, then it's absolutely going to be winning for SHG. But it seems to me like if they don't gain some sort of advantage by 15-20 minutes, it becomes scary for the side of SHG to play against that amount of burst. Yeah, interesting rune choice coming through here, but we do see a little bit of trading going on in the bot lane, nothing too special. Yeah, so what I was going to mention is there has been a little bit of an emphasis on Thresh players to start running the Guardian rune of choice, where you do Lantern max and you just play around the defensive properties that Thresh can bring to a lane. Charlie instead going for the Aftershock, so primarily wanting to play a lot more aggressively, and to an extent it makes sense in lane. Once you hit level 2, you can be very proactive into this Ezreal. Oh, Yeah, so as I was saying, at level 2, you can be very proactive in this lane as the Thresh. Not level 1. At level 1, you're gonna really suffer because of the AD carry matchup. The Ezreal does significantly more than the Aphelios, who doesn't even have an ability essentially leveled. So there's not a whole lot you can really do. But Charlie just going a little bit too aggressively there and just gets punished for the fact that they're just lacking at level 1. Yeah, I mean, it's just a case of going too aggressive too early, and the Q flash comes through with the auto from Deanton. It's more than enough for a solo kill at level, or a 2v2 bot lane kill at level 1. Yeah, Ricky looking for a ward there, but it's an awkward timer. The general rule of thumb is junglers are going to be ganking sort of just before 3:15 or a little bit, around 3:30 time. And that was about the 3:30 marker that Ricky went for the ward. So you have to respect those timers for jungle ganks because they're playing around the crabs. And unfortunately, doesn't respect it. Mutton is there and the punish comes through. So no flash on the enemy Lilia. That could mean danger when this Ornn hits level 6, you send Mutton topside, and that could be a free kill for the side of Axiz. Yeah, it's looking really nice if the side of Axiz. Because this Ezreal has that little bit of extra damage, they feel like they can take any fights they want to, and suddenly he becomes very oppressive. Oh, Ricky is doing work here on Toll 2, though. Oh, I would have flashed. I absolutely would have flashed there. I can respect that. Very scary, but Toll2 knows his numbers, and he absolutely survives. So it's big he does survive that, but overall, the Lily are now going to have a really strong sort of lane state. Could potentially force Toll2's teleport, and that does end up doing so because of the way that that wave would have crashed. Which means you now have teleport advantage for any dragon-based plays here in the next few minutes. Yeah. Yeah, it does end up working out there for the side of the Hawks. And whilst Charlie went down in the initial play, it didn't matter because you trade it off into the AD carry. And it felt as though Axiz, they wanted to try and make something happen afterwards. But Anko-chan is there, so you can't go too aggressively, even though it looked like a 2v1. And as they play out a little bit longer, you can see here, as I'm talking about Charlie, he goes in, a great death sentence lands there onto Dean T, and then the flay comes through. It's going to be traded off, but you happily take that as the Thresh, and whilst initially it looks bad here for Howler, Anko-chan is coming and they saw him on the wards, they gotta back up. And then just in the mid lane, Nalicio goes a little bit too aggressively, lands the chain, but notice the W expires. There's no way out now for the LeBlanc. And unfortunately, you don't have the damage if you're going to be going for Distortion or Mimic Chain, rather. So wasn't able to look for the solo kill and just gets murdered by Wasteland. And whilst that does mean you can then teleport towards the bot lane later on down the line, it doesn't matter. Howler with an excellent flash to deny the re-engage from Dicey. And at this point, SHG, they just want to get out. They've done what they wanted to do. But Howler just gets one more, doesn't get trading off for Nalicio, and Wasteland is forced to flash at the very end of the play, but overall, you gotta take that if you are the Hawks. Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be a bit of a slow play for the side of the Hawks. They're happy to take their time as they wait for their members to be set up properly on the map. So I'm not expecting anyone to start it just yet, and if anyone does, it's going to most likely be Button, who is in a little bit of a better state to really try this, but D&T is getting chased down by Howler a little bit. D&T trying for the animation information denial, I suppose, on the ultimate there from the True Shot Barrage. Unfortunately, it does get dodged out by Howler anyway, and Howler ends up picking up the solo kill with an excellent Moonlight Vigil of his own. Yeah, so it's just the standard AD carry 1v1. The way this works out is Ezreal needs to keep Aphelios at maximum range, so as soon as Howler is able to close the distance, those track rooms are going to start doing work, and D&T, he tries for the True Shot Barrage animation, information denial, but doesn't end up working out, and Howler just lands that Moonlight Vigil because there's no flash on the Ezreal left over. Yeah, absolutely, and he's going to be the guy to watch out for. As you say, that Gale Force coming through means aggressive plays are absolutely an option, as well as defensive ones, because we mentioned how important it is for this Aphelios to try and keep himself alive, and the reliance on Lantern. Well, if you have this Gale Force instead of the Shield Bow, you could potentially dodge one of those major engage tools, and in that regard, more likely to survive, so it makes a lot of sense to do this itemization here, but to have it so early is going to be very dangerous for the side of Axiz. Yeah, it's an interesting game, this one, but the Hawks might be catching the enemy bot lane here. The skill check comes through there from the Hawks. A great play out of Charlie and Howler to pick that one up. So Wasteland gets engaged on a little bit of chunk coming through there from Nalicio. It's just nice and pretty from them. The important factor is the fact that Charlie is keeping D&T at range. There's no ability for this Ezreal to follow up on the engage outside of a little bit of damage, but Mutton is now coming for Wasteland. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this Viego in the late game is going to be one of those major carries, but we're going to see this 2v2 here in the bot side again, and just keep your eyes on what doesn't be happening here for the side of D&T, because The Grand Entrance is nice originally, or rather the quickness is Grand Entrance combo lands in, but look at how much D&T can actually do to Howler. Only lands that True Shot Barrage. There's no other follow-up aside from one auto attack, maybe two there, for the entirety of the rest of the play, and the lifesteal is enough to keep the Aphelios alive, so it's great work from Charlie there to deny the enemy AD carry from closing the gap and really following up on Dicey's engage. Yeah, it's unfortunate for Charlie. I can understand why. After you've got that many sort of plays working out in a row, you want to keep fishing, you want to keep fighting. And in the meantime, though, Anko-chan going to drop the Herald in the mid lane, try and get a couple more plates. Ideally, they would want to take this plate first, so they can get a little bit more value out of the Herald, but it's not going to end up happening this time around, so there's going to be that alpha plate left over. But it's still a fine situation here for the Hawks. They are slightly ahead. Realistically, I'd like them to be a little bit more, but Dicey engaging. Ooh, TP. Yeah, and crucially, there's no trade back there from the side of the Hawks, which means there's going to be that tower most likely taking quite a few plates, quite a bit of gold swing, and just shutting that Aphelios out. Bearing in mind how far ahead Howler is, getting any sort of play on him is going to be valuable, but Wasteland is making the punish come through and going to secure that first tower here in the mid lane.
Middle part, your audio's not working.
Oh, so apparently I haven't been casting this game.
It's a shame too, because you've been doing a banging job, my friend. You've been smashing it, but it's fine. You know what?
Oh my goodness.
It's fine, because I imagine the audience, you know, I'm sure that Twitch chat can agree, you could hear the commentary in your hearts, you know? And does anything else really matter? You know what does matter, though? The amount of poke that's gone down onto D&T there, because that's a lot of damage there onto that Ezreal, and that's most likely going to be him now forced to either take those Crocs for lifesteal, or to just reset, in which case you're taking a lot of tower damage. But it does mean going to be taking those Crocs, trying to get a little bit more HP back. Lifesteal off the wave, but that does mean now that the vision can be set up from the side of the Hawk spot lane, as they can just have a little bit of free time to auto those wards and get themselves the vision control to make sure the Munt can't really punish them for playing as far up as they have, because to be honest with you, they've been playing very far up in this lane, very aggressively, so it's very important for them to make sure they have that vision set up properly to keep themselves safe.
Yeah, vision very important to grab, as Hawks are in a commanding position heading towards this mid game. Obviously, a couple of plays have come out from Axiz that have stymied their aggression a little bit. Martin is getting to a point on this Viego where he's going to be pretty scary, but DNT is no slouch either, as we can see the gold still heavily in favor of his ADC counterpart in Howler, but if you keep landing those Mystic shots, it's going to be nice for you.
Yeah, I mean, it is the key aspect, is the fact that Howler is so far ahead, right? But at the same time, it means that we know exactly who Axiz is going to be targeting. If you could shut this Aphelios out, yes, there are other damage threats for sure, but with him so far ahead, he's absolutely the majority of the damage output. So if you can get that one kill onto him, that's going to be a reset for Viego, and from there, fights can start to snowball for Axiz. So whilst they are behind about 1,000, 2,000 gold at this point, they still have avenues they can explore, and their champions still have some counterplay within these fights. So we need to keep an eye out for what they can do, specifically given the fact that Cloud Soul Point is going to be on the table here within 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's where we're going to be getting those major fights breaking out. Obviously, very important for Hawks as it gets them to that soul point. Axiz will want to deny that as much as they can, although haven't really shown a propensity for playing around Drakes recently. We hoped it would change yesterday, and it didn't. Maybe it will be the case this time around, as the Hawks, looks like they're giving up pressure around this Drake, will instead be picking up the second Herald.
Yeah, I mean, there is an argument to be made that in general, the Cloud Soul is kind of one of the weaker souls, depending on your champions and how often they're going to be proccing it, how often that proc is actually going to be effective within them. But the individual dragon itself is fairly useful here for some of the members of Axiz, so I feel like you're pretty happy to get the chance to pick this one up. Deny that soul, yes, but also just get the dragon for yourselves. At the same time, though, it means you're giving up mid priority, and that Herald is going to have an immediate influx of gold, as you can just get that mid tower, and most likely now be able to set up vision for your next couple of dragons.
Yeah, it's got the observer zooming out. Mutton attempting a flank on the backside, but dissuaded by Anchor Chan. As the Hawks not really pushing the envelope too far, I think they recognize that even as this game goes later on, the Aphelios, the victor, will be providing a lot of damage themselves, so don't need to make anything too risky occur early on.
Yeah, you don't really want to just push the tempo at the moment, but we see with this current reset timings and item spikes, I feel like SHG in a really solid spot. Howler just picking up his second item, but Wasteland might be getting collapsed on, as might Anko.
Nice dodge away by Anchor Chan. Spectrumore cast towards the Rift Scuttler, picked up by Axiz, so small victory there. But again, aggression dissuaded on the bottom side of the map. The Hawks able to get out of dodge without really being punished.
Yeah, and this is kind of the issue that the side of Axiz has been having for a while, right? The laning phase is always pretty solid, but after that, making those plays work usually is quite a difficult part for them, on top of obviously the vision control. This game, the vision control is significantly better than we're used to, right? They did set up the vision beforehand for the dragon. Even though it wasn't contested, they did set it up properly, so I like the fact they are solving some of those problems, but the execution still needs to be there for the engagers in the fights, and that's the next thing we need to see from them.
As the Baron is spawning in 15 seconds, could see that execution come out around there. Not a massive advantage for the Hawks as of yet, as Mutton is waiting in the rings, looking to catch out Ricky. Spectrumore will time out, though, as the Viego is tabbed by the Swell Seed. Ricky will not be under any danger. I like this from Charlie. Just hanging around in Fog of War, waiting to make a play with that Lantern should he be needed.
Yeah, absolutely, there to counter any sort of engage attempt, and they understand that someone has to be tanking this top wave if the side of Axiz wants to keep it, or the tower. But SHG, they're trying for a cheeky one, but it's spotted out by True Shot Barrage, and the members are coming.
Yeah, and Alicia does have TP, will be joining the fight. Currently only 4 members of the Hawks around. The hook beautifully lands onto the Blanc, who can't do anything, will be dropping at the start of the fight. The Forge God is called, and Axiz look to answer. Dicey with a good knock-up landing onto Aphelios, will be taking him down at the start of the fight. The resets have started to come through, but Lilia kind of just taking over everything. Ricky with a large amount of damage, flashing forward onto Toltu, who will get chased down, bopped over the head, as it is a third kill of the fight, I believe, for Ricky, and the Hawks secure themselves an ace.
Yeah, triple kill there for Ricky. Nice stuff from the side of SHG. They're able to find the fight that they absolutely were looking for. Unfortunately, the jungler does drop, which means you can't start the Baron just yet. But the fact that they were able to get that pick onto Alicio at the start, the problem is the TP is just a little bit too aggressive there from the LeBlanc. You're teleporting into the entirety of the members. You don't have a stopwatch or a Zhonya's to stall for time, really. So as soon as this teleport is channeled, you have to hope the rest of your team is there to follow up. But look at the other members on the map here. 2 of them aren't even close. You're looking for Ezreal to defend against 3, and that's not going to happen. So the hook lands from Charlie, and it's just more than enough damage to block this LeBlanc, especially when you land that key lilting lullaby off the backside. But the quickness is nice. Problem is, Dink can't do anything because he's getting focused down by both carries, and even though a lot of work is done here by the Viego, if you're not having any other damage sources, there's not a whole lot you can do. Everyone gets cleaned up, Wasteland gets a double, it's a triple for Ricky, and it's just a nice fight overall for the Hawks.
Yeah, it felt like it was very much circles of death that took down Axiz in that fight. 5k damage from Ricky is a very, very normal number from a champion that I believe was 0-0-2 before that fight started out. So yeah, we're absolutely fine.
He was trying to do Nalicio's share of the damage as well, so it evens out.
Okay, that makes sense. Well,
yeah.
2 items now onto Ricky as Anka-chan is running forward. That Lilia is going to be even scarier as you get into these fights, maybe starting soon as Toltu calls the Forge God, making plays onto Anka-chan, who is able to use that Crescent Guard to deny some of the damage. And now the Ornn is a little bit in no man's land. Dicey diving forward, though, gets the multi-man knockup, but DNT is just deleted before he can do anything. 3 kills already going over to Axiz. They pick up a 4th as well, and it looks so good for Axiz, but the Hawks are able to punish.
Yeah, the LeBlanc isn't even there, so it's a 4v5 fight being opted into by the side of Axiz. It's an overengage, and they get punished beautifully there by the Hawks. They land every CC they needed to do, and the damage is more than enough. You got yourself a 5-1 Victor, a 5-killer Felios, 3 here on Ricky, so they've got plenty of damage. With DT spawning in 8 seconds, I feel as though the Hawks might not be done here.
Yeah, that's a very big knockup from Dicey, but he's looking very small on the fountain. Respawn starting to come through, but Ezreal 1v5 doesn't look likely. Mutton and Toltu coming to even the odds. We get a couple of resets here. It's big. Wasteland already dropping, but there goes the Viego. It's another kill for DNT on the backside, and the Nexus does fall. Attempted heroics from Axiz, but the Hawks are able to dispatch them in rapid fashion.
Yeah, great stuff from the Hawks. It felt like they were in decent control for most of this game, specifically when they got fed in the bot side. It felt like from that point onwards, Howler was in a decent spot to carry the game. But Ricky did a lot of work as well. We can't discount the power of this Lilia. Was picked to dominate that lane, and it came into the team fights and dominated those too. So, great stuff to see from the side of the Hawks.
Yeah, and I really felt like this game was actually fairly back and forth. Axiz, whilst it wasn't the most aggressive that we've seen from them, they were actually making plays, which is something that we couldn't really talk about them doing yesterday. But the team fighting just felt a hell of a lot cleaner from the Hawks. Obviously getting the advantage onto your Aphelios, and then a little bit later onto your Victor in the early game does make things work for you. But like you mentioned, really cannot discount Ricky's skill on this Lilia pick.
Yeah, and if I'm allowed to talk for the side of Axiz for just a second, it feels like the same issues that were plaguing them within day 2 are starting to come back here again in day number 3, where the vision was better, significantly better, in fact, but it's another case of picking fights when you don't have your members there, and they were opting into numbers disadvantage fights on 2 or 3 separate occasions in that game, and at this level, you can't do that. You can't just skill check players. We're not playing in bronze at this point. We're playing against people that they have hands. So you can't necessarily just assume that they're not going to land hooks when you're teleporting into 3 people. You can't assume that you're going to win a 4v5 fight when your LeBlanc is down in Narnia. It's not going to happen. You need to actually set the fights up correctly with your team ready to capitalize. Because if you don't do that, you're just giving the enemy a free fight.
And I definitely think that there was glimpses, again, as there always have been from this Academy side, especially from DNT and Dicey, who are real standouts and trying their absolute darndest to carry this game. But ultimately, again, it's Axiz dropping down.
Yeah, and unfortunately that does mean they've only picked up sort of the 1 win so far. I think they've still got a game later today, I believe, the final game of the day, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, against Burning Core, I think.
Yes, so yes. They still have that game later on today, so we'll see if they can, wrap things or pull things together and realize the mistakes they've been making. As I say, this team still has a lot of upside, absolutely. Yeah. But it feels like a weighted coin, and they need to sort that one out. Maybe swap it around for another one, and we'll see how the flip goes. But take nothing away from the side of the Hawks. They did absolutely everything right. They punished correctly, and it's not like they didn't pick their own fights. The way they set up the Baron was beautiful. The way that they knew that no one was nearby to contest, and it was an overt force from Nalicio to try and protect it. Yes, but they forced that to happen because the side of the Axis felt like they had to do something to prevent the game falling away from them, and they just pushed a little bit too hard.
Yeah, I think when you can start forcing mistakes on your opponents, that's really when you're demonstrating that your ability to play the map is actually on a level above maybe what we expected to see. Recollect, coming up, we have got a very interesting matchup between a couple of teams that haven't yet managed to pick up a win. So, we are guaranteed to see either Rascal, Jesters, or Sengoku pick up a W in the next game. We're going to be heading to a short break, but we'll see you in a few minutes for what's going to be an interesting game.